Hello and welcome to the Core Reports Weekend Edition. You may have heard of range anxiety. Now, this is what you feel because your battery is running out of juice in an electric vehicle. It could be a two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or four-wheeler, or for that matter, even a truck. So what do? In most cases, you have no choice but to go back to where you came from or find a charging station. The other option that's increasingly becoming popular, or at least is being experimented quite widely, is something called battery as a service. So there's one company in India called Sun Mobility, run by Chetan Maini, who's quite a veteran in the electric and battery space, almost 3 decades in India now actually. He's also the man behind Reva, the brand that was bought by Mahindra Electric. So what Sun Mobility does is essentially run a network of stations which supply these batteries to you as and when you drive up to them and change them for you. So the battery belongs to the service station or this network. They will charge it and maintain it, and you essentially land up there to swap it as and when you obviously run out of juice. Now, this is running in several cities across the country, but more importantly or interestingly, they've now partnered with Indian Oil Corporation, India's largest oil company or refining company. The joint venture between Sun Mobility and Indian Oil Corporation will hopefully take all of this to some 37,000 stations, which means you could be driving into a petrol pump anywhere in the country and obviously just get a battery swapped instead of obviously using petrol or the internal combustion engine. Now, how will this work and how it will eventually roll out to that scale is something that we have to see. But the fact is that as an energy source and as an accessible energy source, and going back to where I started, to address the issue of range anxiety, this is an interesting solution. So my guest for today is Chetan Maini, the founder of Sun Mobility. Chetan, thank you so much for joining me. So we're going to talk about battery swapping in a moment, and you've of course been in this space of electric vehicle mobility, of which batteries are a critical part because they power them. But I'm going to come to the battery swapping part and what the network looks like and how it could work and deliver. But before that, I want to use you to help our listeners and viewers understand how a battery really works and how is it similar and not similar to, let's say, a tank of gasoline, whether it's a two-wheeler that we're talking about or a four-wheeler. So you're free to start wherever you want.
Sure. So, batteries are more a storage device, right? That you put in energy and you take it back out. So they just store the energy, right? So you're putting in electricity and taking out electricity. In the case of fuel, you're actually burning it, right? Every liter of fuel you burn becomes into carbon dioxide and all the other chemicals, and it's in the atmosphere. So in a way, one's a sort of energy storage, and one's a fuel that actually burns, and with that, you can't get it back on this area. In this case, you do it. And then, of course, batteries degrade over time. They can hold less and less energy, and they can reduce their performance over time in terms of how much they can store on this front. A fuel has a lot of energy in it, right? So a liter of fuel may have approximately 10 kilowatt hours of energy, right? And if you take probably a similar amount of it, so the same weight, if you were to take a battery, it may have 200 watt hours. So probably 50 times less than the same weight of fuel, right? And that's a big challenge on this area. Of course, when you burn a fuel, only 30 or 25% goes in useful energy, 75% is lost. But when you use something from a battery, you can get 85 to 90% of useful energy in it, right? So clearly, therefore, the amount of weight of battery and the size of battery is disproportionately larger compared to that of what you'd use in fuel. And so therefore, the importance of efficiency, battery sizing, all of that becomes very critical as you think of looking at fuel versus batteries.
Right. Now, when you're actually driving, let's say, and let's take to electric two-wheelers because that's where the
Right.
big market in India is, or for that matter, three-wheelers as well. So how does a battery work in terms of the way it's powering your vehicle and the way you are extracting or pulling energy from it as you drive or accelerate or slow down and so on?
Sure. So in a battery, it then goes to a motor controller, which think of as like a fan regulator. You know how you can change your speed on this front. I'm just giving a much more complex version of it. And then to a motor, which would be similar to your fan, which then drives the rear wheels and powers the vehicle, right? And sort of as you accelerate, it's like increasing the regulator speed of your fan, you increase it. Only difference is that the when you brake, the motor becomes a sort of generator and can charge the battery back, and one can get anywhere from 5 to 20% of the energy back as that happens, right? That's very different from a fuel because you're taking a liter of fuel, you're combustioning it, that produces power, which then powers the rear wheels, and you have exhaust and heat that's produced at the outcome. And of course, you can't, when you brake, you don't get energy back. You can't fill back on this front. So that's sort of a broad construct between what you think of an ICE vehicle or internal combustion engine vehicle and electric vehicle.
And just on that point of the regeneration, as it's called, how does that energy come back to the battery? How what's happening behind the scenes?
Sure. So a motor, when done in reverse direction, right, or with the electronics way, a motor can become a generator, right? So think of it's now a generator, and therefore it's charging the battery back on this front. There's some electronics to ensure it's being done correctly, right? But it just becomes a generator. So it takes some of the energy of moving, which is your kinetic energy, and converting back. So instead of you're using brakes to burn that up in heat, you actually can use that as a generator and charge the batteries back, right? So this really helps especially in India and stop and go driving conditions.
Right. And comparing to a liter of fuel again, and let's say a two-wheeler electric versus internal combustion or petrol, how is the way I drive it going to impact the way energy is used? For example, in fuel, I could accelerate suddenly, slow down, I could keep accelerating till the end. Uh, as I understand, it doesn't work exactly like that with stored energy or battery in this case.
So most batteries will probably give you very similar performance till around its 80% of it is discharged. And between 80 to 0, it may have slightly reduced performance. Sometimes it may not have the reduced performance, but the OEM or may decide to reduce the performance. So you're aware that you want to get more range. So it may not be necessarily the battery is a challenge, but it's about a sort of emotional thing to say, hey, I got to start thinking through it. If everything was perfect, you won't worry about it. But if a thing slow down by itself, you start to say, okay, I need to think about this area, right? So from that point of view, it looks at it. Otherwise, the performance is reasonably uniform, right? But does go down slightly towards the end of it. So you can accelerate, you can do everything, but at very low states of charge, you'd have some gap in the performance, maybe 10 to 30% when you come down to 80% or less.
And in general, the electronics ensures that you don't drain it to zero and you sort of stop or forced to stop at a certain point so that the battery is still in good condition to be charged again.
That's correct. So most electric vehicles will have a gauge. The gauge will have like a low power mode. So if you go too low, it reduces the power mode. Some of them have multiple low power modes. Some of the vehicles also have a reserve, where you can actually turn off and on the key or press it, and you can go say 2 kilometers. So there are different methodologies that have been put in place and enough indications, but it's a bit different. If you have in a scooter 5 liters or 7 liters of petrol, that could give you maybe 350 kilometers, and maybe a full battery is giving you 120 to 150. So your starting off size is much smaller, and so there's a bit more initially of awareness around the fact that there is less energy. But once people start to use it, they realize that they're doing only 40, 50, 80 kilometers a day. They have no problem. But it's initially a little bit of a different move, a different perspective that it takes probably a month to get used to.
Right, and I'm going to come to why swapping could be useful in the context of your venture. But you've been in the space now for close to 3 decades. Now, what's changed in storage and batteries in these 3 decades? And when or how have the maximum, let's say, changes happened, or the maximum incremental changes? When did they happen, and what has that resulted in?
Sure. So when we started, lithium-ion was out of range of cost. It was lead acids. And lead acids would be around 25 to 30 watt hours per kg. So that's the energy per kg. A top-end lithium-ion cell would be around 250. So it's 8 to 10x lighter than probably a lead acid. So that's the kind of shift
And
you're
lead
talking
acid is
about.
what you are used to seeing in cars and or even for that matter
Exactly.
two-wheelers. Yeah.
Right. So lithium ion has done that, and that's probably growing every year. So it was probably 150 10 years ago. It was 100 before that. So you've seen an increase of energy density. That's one side of it. The second, probably 20 years ago, the price of lithium ion batteries may have been $1,300 per kilowatt hour. Today they're sub $100, right? So there's a 13x drop in, sorry, pricing. There's a 8 to 10x increase in the performance compared to older technologies like lead acid, right? So of course this has been over the last few years, but probably around 7 years ago, you got these magical areas where pricing was becoming reasonable, right? And the technology had matured enough that you saw a huge impact, and that's where you've seen the last 7 years a significant increase in the adoption of electric mobility as it's hit that sort of points. But there's continuous innovation, and every year you're seeing prices go down around 8% year on year, and you're seeing performance go up around 5 to 8% also.
So when you say performance, you mean that the amount of energy stored in the same size of pack, or do you mean the its power to do, let's say, much more or go faster and so on?
A combination. I think clearly the amount of distance you can go is much higher, but clearly, there are certain battery packs that can even have 2x or 3x the performance in terms of power that you need, right? So if you're a high performance vehicle, you look at more power. If you want longer distances, then you look at more range. And the chemistry is suitably modified. Do you want lower cost? Do you want long range? Do you want more life? Do you want higher temperature performance? So according to that, you can't get everything in one box, and you normally, based on your market conditions, you optimize for what you need for that business case.
And how are batteries made? I mean, the kind, again, we are seeing in two-wheelers in India, or for that matter, even four-wheelers.
So most of the batteries you see today are lithium-ion chemistries. In that is lithium-ion NMC, which is a nickel, manganese, cobalt, and you have LFP batteries, which are lithium-ion phosphate batteries. Right? These are the two predominant ones, and in them there are variations, and there's also some newer chemistries that are trying to combine the benefits of both. Right? How they're made, it is sort of you like. If you remember the high school experiment, you would put a couple of things into a couple of rods into a orange or something, and then you can light a bulb and look at it. So the idea is you have two electrodes, right, an anode and a cathode, and these have the coatings on them, and then you've got material inside, right, which is the gel in the case of this, which is the electrolyte, and then you have a little separator which separates the two. Think of a sort of a high-tech muslin cloth that allows things to flow through but still keeps things in shape, right? And then when you charge it, you sort of build up the energy into it, and then you can remove and discharge it. So batteries, so the production lines look at making an anode, making a cathode. These are sort of layers that come through. Then they're either rolled or they're stacked together, and then they're filled with the electrolyte, and then they go through what's called a formation process to get them ready, and then they're tested and shipped out.
So apart from the complexity and sophistication, at the core of it, the battery that we are talking about in a two-wheeler or in, let's say, in an advanced Tesla is the same as the battery that I would use to power a radio or any electronic gadget. Is that correct?
The cell could be reasonably similar, but they would have a little bit different requirements, right? So if you were powering a Tesla, you would use a higher power cell, right? If you're looking at your phone, you'd use a high energy cell because you want to last longer for the whole day, and you're discharging over 20 hours. Well, you can drive a car very fast over a few hours and discharge it, so it needs a lot more power. So you'd look at it from that point of view. As you look at technologies like in the case of battery swapping, you want very long life, right? So you have a chemistry that's more longer life. So they are similar chemistries of lithium ion, but the way you would use the anodes and the cathodes and the materials you'd use would be slightly different to get what you want from a business point of view.
Right. And that obviously things are quite advanced now, and that is pretty easy to do for, like say an Apple or a Samsung is configuring a battery chemistry for its phone versus, let's say, a Tesla or a Tata Nexon doing it for its car.
Yes, huge complexity because you've got in the case of a cell phone, you have one cell, In the case of these larger packs, you could have from, in a two-wheeler, you may have, 13 to 15 of them, going all the way to maybe 200 or to 300 of them in a larger battery pack. Now, all of them have to be connected. They've got to make sure they have perfect value. Then the temperatures are very high, so you've got to cool it down. So thermal management is important. A lot of sensors and electronics come in, right? They have to be very robust. So how you join them and weld them and take vibration for 10 years of transportation. So while the core chemistry may have similarities, there's a lot of effort to take it from what we call a cell level all the way to a pack level, and that also is very critical as we think of the automotive side.
Right, and you mentioned thermal management, and we've been seeing very hot days in India, heat waves to be specific. Does that affect, or could it affect the condition of the battery that's housed inside a two-wheeler or a car in a country like India, or anywhere where we see such high temperatures?
Yes, it does. So if you were on a two-wheeler and you parked your vehicle in the sun, then the battery will heat up to ambient temperature. When you drive, it gets even hotter, and when you charge, it gets even hotter. So, you could see temperatures go above 50, 55 degrees, right? Which start to deteriorate the battery significantly. So battery at 25 compared to battery at 55 may have three times more life. So you see sort of significant deterioration in the battery on this area. In a lot of the cars today, they're liquid cooled batteries, and so they have an opportunity to run an air conditioning system. At least when you're charging, they do it. And some of them, even when they're parked, can work on it. But then using your own energy to keep the batteries cool, depending on the philosophy, right? In the case of something like swapping, when it goes in the station, we cool the battery. So when it comes out, you have a battery at 25, 27 degrees. And then when you take in the vehicle, the impact is much less, right? So depending on the type of solution, temperatures play a very important part in terms of they reduce performance, they increase the charge time on this front, and of course they can also create safety hazards if they're not correctly managed.
So tell us about the swapping network that you built and are now building further.
Yeah, I mean, just as a premise to this whole thing, right? I mean, as you look at electrics, the challenges has been around high cost of acquisition because size and expense of the battery, range anxiety. What if I don't have charge? Long refueling time, and the fact that can I have an infrastructure that seamlessly works with me, right? So our at Sun Mobility, we started this to really address these challenges here, right? So by removing the battery from the vehicle from the equation of a vehicle, you get the price of an electric vehicle to be cheaper or equivalent to an internal combustion engine vehicle, and you get the cost per kilometer to be cheaper, and you're swapping in a couple of minutes, which is similar to what is refueling, in fact, faster than refueling. So you sort of address that area, right? In that, what we've done is we've tried to see two solutions. One is for the small form factors of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and small four-wheelers, right, up to say 2 tons, which constitute 80% of vehicles in India. And we've created one solution for all of them. So you can use one battery, you can use two batteries, you can use three, or in a larger vehicle, use four. So between 30 seconds to say 2 minutes, you can swap your batteries in and out. So the stations are identical, the battery is identical, and it's an open architecture interoperable within multiple vehicle types. So today we have over 25 vehicle types running on our battery solution across two, three, and small four-wheeler vehicles in this platform, right? We have around 650 stations. We do around 1.2 million swaps, every month in these 18 cities, and have close to around 450 million kilometers that we've clocked across these various platforms.
Right. So at what point do people usually bring their batteries and drive in and say, okay, I want to swap? So you said you're at 650 centers right now, and
That's
that's
correct.
across the country. Is it more in some parts, for example, south and
Yeah.
west?
So these are in key cities that we've done, and others we're piloting. So Delhi, we have around 400 stations. So at every 2 kilometers, we have a station, right? In Bangalore, we have around 100 stations. Which, to give you a comparison, Bangalore has an LPG LPG network for around 200,000 autos, and the LPG network is 84. So we have around 100 stations that more than enough caters to that, right? And in other cities like Chandigarh or in parts of Kerala or in other places, we're in a smaller region of that because you don't have to be in the entire city. And so the stations are located where there's high
Right.
density of the traffic that we're looking at through.
And
So it's
and
a
the,
fairly good network within the areas that we're operating.
Right, and I'll come to that in a moment. So the battery itself is designed by you in a way that it can either as one unit or multiples of units fit in, as you said, 25 different vehicles from different manufacturers and of course
Yes.
form factors, two-wheelers, three-wheelers and four-wheelers.
Yes, and an important ingredient in that is we have what we call a dock, and this dock is where the battery fits into, and the dock has a bit of electronics and small computer and software, and that talks to the vehicle. So each vehicle has different requirements, right? So we keep a standard battery, but through this interface unit that we have, energy interface unit, we're able to program exactly what that vehicle needs. So if it's from an OEM one, that would be different. That little software would be different. For OEM two, it would be different. While the battery would be identical. This allows us to use the vehicle in multiple platforms and gives the OEM what they need for their customer, which could be different from another customer. For example, how the state of charge is put to gas, or how the regenerative braking, how much energy we give. All of that can be programmed based on what the requirement of that vehicle is. So this enables us to quickly look at it. And yes, as you talked about, we design our batteries, we engineer them, we manufacture them, assemble them in house. So we have an end-to-end control of our batteries, of our stations, of the cloud, of the docks. The entire net, all the technology and the network is fully done by us in house.
And when I buy an electric car or a two-wheeler, it comes with a battery already, and that is a significant part of the cost, or a good part of the cost of that vehicle. So, how am I able to then give that battery to you and then take your battery? At what point would I do that, if so?
So we have two models. We call it battery as a service and mobility as a service. In battery as a service, think of you walking into a showroom and buying your vehicle. You buy it without the battery, right? Like you'd buy your smartphone without the SIM card, right? Then the dealership there will get you on our platform, right? By filling in your information. You have an app, and then you have what's called a key fob, a little RFID key, which you can use. Then and gives you the initial batteries on that front. Then when you go to a station and we run low on charge, you put your key fob on there. It automatically detects your vehicles. You can go through a swap process. The whole process is automated. And at the end, based on how much energy you use, it bills it to you, right? So in a way, you're looking at battery as a service, right? You never own the battery, right? You're always using a battery from whichever station, and you only pay for what you use. You use half the battery, you pay for half the battery, right? That's how it's constructed. In mobility as a service, for fleet owners, we give you the vehicle and the energy and data integrated. So a lot of fleets want to accelerate their deployments, right? And we give them the entire solution there. So those vehicles are on our platform, right? Where on a cost per month, we give them X number of kilometers, right? And they can run the entire vehicle. They manage the driver part, we manage the vehicle and energy part and deploy it. So these are the two models that we today have in the company.
Right. So you've tied up with Indian Oil, and that partnership obviously helps you access their network of over 30,000 stations. But could other players also be offering this service tomorrow? And if so, then would people have the ability to interchange? Is there some other analogy that we can apply here?
So I think the analogy is sort of like it's a service provider, right? You sign up with a service provider X for your telephones, right? You can't go from one to the other. Similarly, if you buy a gas cylinder, you're with an HP or an Indane, right? So you're a service provider. So think of Sun Mobility as a service provider where you sign on. Now, some companies offer multiple swapping providers. So when you go to get your vehicle, you may choose in the future for company A or B. Like today, you choose mobile provider A or B. So similar to that, that option could be available. And once you're on there, then you're on that platform because it's an expensive asset that has been tested against that vehicle. It's all been proven out, right? Because the OEM is selling it, right, in a way. So he has to go through the entire process. But then the interchange may be more challenging. But although we have, upgraded several thousand vehicles with an older battery, where customers have come to us and we provided them our dock, and we've upgraded them because the batteries have gone bad after 18 months. And instead of them buying a new battery, they said, "Can you put a swap solution?" So those retrofit solutions are very much possible, in addition to offering a new vehicle with this battery.
And could you give us a sense? So I don't. If you were to pick again a two-wheeler to start with, if I were to
Yes.
go for a battery as a service solution, wherein I'm not buying the battery when I'm buying the two-wheeler, and then I'm signing up with you. So what could be the price difference, and what would I pay to you roughly? And then what would it cost me, let's say, over 1 year of use?
Right. So if you were to, let's say you looked at a scooter, an internal combustion engine scooter, a scooter which had looked identical, right, and had a fixed battery in it, and a third scooter again that looked identical which had a swappable battery, right? Just giving you, and think of it at not the low performance but good performance scooters, right? The probably the one on the internal combustion would cost you around 1 lakh of rupees, or 1 to 1.1 lakh rupees, and would probably run around 2 rupees per kilometer on your operating cost, right? The electric one would probably cost you 1.4 lakhs, right? On this front, we have some subsidies and some concessions, which reduces slightly, and your cost per kilometer maybe say 30 to 40 paisa, depending on what infrastructure you use. If you're doing it at home, it will be much cheaper, maybe even 20. But if you use outside infrastructure, it could be up to 30 to 40, right? So your cost is, is more, but your savings is much higher. In the case of swapping, your probably cost would be around 70,000, right? Right. So you're much cheaper on the purchase price, even to an internal combustion engine vehicle, and probably your cost per kilometer is around 1 rupee. So in a way, what you've done is you've taken the battery out of the equation, right? You've reduced the upfront cost, and you've given a cost of operation that's for 40 to 50% of that of an existing ice scooter.
Uh, can you repeat the last one again? You said it could, if you paid 70,000 for a two-wheeler without a battery, it would cost
The
you.
cost per kilometer would be around 1 rupee compared to 2 rupees for a petrol vehicle, right?
So, and why is that? So why is this more if I have not bought the battery? Is it because I'm not now
No,
having
no,
a
that's I'm
battery to offer
talking.
to you, or
So I'm sorry, I'm talking about a petrol vehicle, right? I looked at, right, in an electric vehicle, it would be probably 1.4 lakhs, right? So
for the vehicle
almost half
itself?
the
Yeah.
cost of battery, right? And the cost per kilometer maybe between 20 to 40 paisa. So your cost of ownership is much cheaper on thing. But also what's happening is that at higher temperatures and everything, after 3 to 4 years, you may replace the battery, right? In the case of a battery as a service, you're just paying a certain amount even 10 years from today, right? And also you get automatic upgrades, right? So today, every year, if you buy the battery, it deteriorates. Like your cell phone, you notice how it gets bad, right? It keeps getting worse on this, or anything, or any battery would do. In our case, a year ago, a year and a half ago, we had a battery to compare to today, which is 40% better. So if a customer has come on our platform, they're getting these upgrades. And as technology keeps changing, you get newer and newer upgrades. So in a way, in batteries as a service, your product in the next 5 to 10 years gets better. Whereas in a fixed battery, your range keeps decreasing, and you have, after every few years, a very high replacement cost, which could be probably 50% of the cost of the vehicle.
And right now you're saying that if I were to use a battery as a service, as a model on an electric two-wheeler for 1 year, my gross or my total cost at the end of that 1 year should be much less for a battery or an electric two-wheeler versus a petrol two-wheeler.
Significantly lower. And also, I think the other part is, a lot of people don't have infrastructure, right? We're talking about 20% of people have infrastructure, but 80% of India doesn't have infrastructure. And the second, today, a lot of our customers are fleet providers or using it on B2B businesses, right? For deliveries and everything. And their delivery requirements are change every day. They cannot wait for 3 4 hours to charge. They can only wait for a minute or two because their
Sure.
utilization is their earnings. So there are other reasons too, which of course besides the lower upfront cost and everything else, that it makes business sense for them. It's more viable, and they look at it, and there's no risk of the battery.
And how often in your own let's say in what you've rolled out, how often are people coming and changing or swapping batteries, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers?
At least once a day, sometimes twice, and
So the same
people
person will come once or twice a day, you're saying?
once, yeah, once, sometimes twice. But some vehicles are used for 16-hour shifts, right? So, for example, when you look at something like an Amazon Fresh, they go every 2 hours delivery and they run 16 hours. But they run with two drivers, right? And so a second shift. So in those cases, they may be even three or four, right? Because they're doing a lot of kilometers a day, which is just not possible with regular charging, right? Given the fact that the charging time is so long, right? So clearly, but typically on an average, around 1 to 1, one to 1.5 swaps a day would be what our customers go through, which is not too bad. They're driving in midday, they may swap it once more in 2 minutes and continue.
And yeah, you said it takes just 2 minutes for someone to remove that battery, put a new one, and and do they do? I mean, are there lines usually? You said Bangalore has 100 stations, so are people
Yeah,
waiting in line
yeah.
or?
Sometimes there are. It's like if everyone reaches the same time, you have it. So what we do have is we have the app that tells you where every station is and how many batteries are ready. Not everyone uses it, but the tech is available, and the ones who use it find it much better. We also have a WhatsApp chat bot that tells you you can just say hi, and it tells you where the which is the closest station, how you can go there. So in general, there are some peak times which could happen in a particular region, like you come to a petrol station or a CNG bunk. But with using technology, we're making it easier for the customer, so he has awareness and can choose to on his way back to go to one station versus the other.
And what was your starting inventory of batteries for this project, and what is it today, and how is it replenishing or growing?
So we have over 50,000 batteries on the field today, right? That do, like I said, around 1.2 million swaps a month, right? So they're being used multiple times every day on this front. In terms of starting inventory, it keeps adding on. So as we add more vehicles, the vehicle needs a battery, and then around 20 to 30% extra batteries are put in stations, right? So for every if you use one scooter, then if you use 10 scooters, you may sort of put a station that has two batteries in it extra to support those 10 scooters. So that's typically how this would sort of work, and so it's an incremental way of doing it. It's not a one size fits all and just go full bang. It's just as the business grows, you start adding more and more. All our batteries are connected in real time. We get over 120 parameters every second. All our stations are connected in real time. So we know real time usage of vehicles, state of charge, how the stations are being utilized. And this allows us to optimize the network and provide this information to the customer, since the whole network is fully connected and alive.
So, and how old would be the oldest batteries currently out as part of this 50,000 batteries?
I would say we started in 2017. We did some pilots in 2018 or 2019, really, when we started, right? A couple of years after we launched the project. So they're probably around our oldest batteries, I would say, around 5 years old today in the field,
And
right?
they're still running, and I'm assuming they've come back to you for some kind of reconditioning.
Yeah, so our stations automatically check the battery every day, and they can even test it and reprogram them, right? So a lot of every day before batteries given out, we do about multiple checks, and the health is known. If the health ever drops below a certain level, then we quarantine that battery. You can't access it, and our service person goes and checks it. And then if there's something that's needed that cannot be done remotely, like a software upgrade or something, then we actually physically do it and send it back.
And
So when the customer gets a battery, they always have the right energy in it, right? They
right.
don't. If it's a customer promise that we have.
And does it happen, or rather, I'm pretty sure it does happen that batteries completely die for various reasons, or have died over, let's say, the last 5 years?
Yes, I think there have been, especially during COVID, we had some challenges like most companies, because people took the batteries in their vehicles and didn't come for 3 4 months back to our stations, right? So although there are security systems that shut off the batteries, there were, you had some damages on that front, and then you had to take care. So I think those sort of applications we had some challenges at that time, but now a lot of that is even further fixed around software to allow it to even last longer without, even when it's very low on
And these
charge.
are cases of people who, of course, these batteries could be charged anywhere, but because of COVID and maybe people were not moving around, they did not charge them and left them lying, which is also, I'm assuming,
Yeah, they
an
just had them.
important.
They were like, for example, there was no auto rickshaws running,
Hmm.
correct? Right. So a person who had his batteries in his auto rickshaw literally went back to his village or something, and it was just lying there, right? Because they didn't have anything. So it was hard to get hold of them sometimes and get this. So there was some corner cases, but even now with that, we, right, like I said, put in even further stronger software solutions to take care of extended period non-usage.
Right, but the footnote in this clearly is that a battery has to be charged and it cannot be left lying like that, at least for too long.
It can't, but earlier batteries was a few days. Today, our batteries shut off, and they could last for 4 months, 5 months, maybe without being charged. Right. So So of course we don't want to keep the asset away that long because we're not making money. So using our technology, we get in touch with the customer and everything. If they're going on vacation, we take it back. But the battery today will self protect itself for an extended period of time.
And the same battery will obviously work through the customer's own charging infrastructure as till that person brings it back to you.
No, he completely relies on your infrastructure, right? Because, as I mentioned to you, we control the temperature. We check every battery every day before dispensing it. In case someone has dropped it, we have a sensor that can check it. So there's a host of tests we do to make sure it's done. So that today it's restricted only to our stations, where we manage all of this. It's hard to do it in someone's house today. It's not a technology challenge. It's just something we may introduce in the future. But today it's within our stations.
So therefore, I cannot charge that battery on my own. I have to bring it back to you if I'm running out of juice.
Yes, you just go to any of the stations, typically 2 kilometers away, put your swap card, do it, take it out, and go on. Right.
Got it. So last one or two questions. So all of this, I mean, including the intricacy of, therefore having stations close by, having a wide network so as to ensure that people can come to you as and when their battery starts running out. And of course, they're your customers and tied to you, as you said, you would be in the case of a mobile network. Where are you in terms of profitability of this venture, and how are the numbers looking?
Well, I mean, at this stage, it's been the first stage was technology development. The second was, scaling it up to a certain level. And now with Indian Oil coming in, we're really looking at a large scale, right? So your investments are disproportionate in the early years, as you can imagine, because your philosophy is slightly infra first, right? You got to put infra a little bit before you bring out vehicles. There's a vehicle person says, where can I go? So the investment sort of precedes the deployments and the revenue a bit on this area. And that over time, as the network gets large enough, that gap is much smaller. But in early days, that gap is a little larger as you're going to new cities on this front. Right? So, with the new structure, right, which we have going forward, because we have a joint venture, and then we have Sun Mobility that supplies batteries and stations and everything. The Sun Mobility will be profitable next year, right? And the joint venture, since it's going to be investing a significant amount of money, while it will be better positive in a couple of years, will probably take maybe 3 years to be fully profitable, considering the investments that you're putting in, because you have high depreciation on that front.
Right. And last question, Chetan. So you're obviously known as the man behind Reva. If you were to, in maybe 30 seconds or 60 seconds, draw the arc between the creation of, let's say, battery operated golf caddy, which is what I remember, to the battery itself in this format, how would you describe this journey?
So I was in cars, in personal mobility. I'm in two, three, and four small four wheelers that are 80% of India, right? And that's where all the business is. And we didn't touch upon, we do buses and trucks,
Yeah.
which is 1% of India and 50% of the energy and emissions. So there's been a transition to say, I think multiple people can today do products. The future is going to be around energy and creating a ubiquitous solution that can go into all the OEMs. And that can really accelerate affordable electric mobility. So the vision of affordable electric mobility remains the same for the last 30 years for me. It's around where I believe the impact in society could be larger and business could be larger.
That's a good note to end on. Chetan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me on.